Welcome, brave souls, to Dr. Sinister's Tales of Terror, where the darkest corners of your imagination come to life. Tonight I present to you 4 spine-chilling stories, crafted to haunt your dreams and rattle your very bones. The night is deep, the hour is late, and fear is waiting. Just for you. So sit back, if you dare, and let the darkness consume you. But before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Support us if you want to keep the nightmares coming. Shepherdstown, West Virginia, was the kind of place where history oozed from the cracks in the cobblestone streets, and whispers of old stories danced with the evening breeze. Tucked into a narrow alleyway off Main Street was Higgs & Sons Butcher Shop, a cornerstone of the town for over 3 decades. The patriarch, Walter Higgs, was a kind man, slow-moving and gentle in his demeanor. His son, Stanley, was the opposite, a towering hulk of a man with broad shoulders and calloused hands, his face marred by pockmarks and a permanent scowl. Despite his intimidating appearance, Stanley had a deep well of loyalty and love for his father, a loyalty that simmered like a pot ready to boil over. Carla Higginbottom, one of their regular customers, had been a thorn in Walter's side for years. Carla's shrill voice could curdle milk, and her insults were as sharp as the knives Stanley wielded. She loved to belittle Walter in front of other customers, calling him an old fool who couldn't tell a steak from a stew cut. Stanley hated her with every fiber of his being, his fists clenching under the counter each time she launched one of her tirades. One Friday afternoon, Carla stormed into the shop, her heels clicking against the worn wooden floor like the ticking of a bomb. In her hands was a paper-wrapped package of meat she'd purchased the day before. "Walter," she shrieked, "this is not what I ordered. I asked for filet mignon, and you gave me this." She slammed the package onto the counter, glaring daggers at the old man. Walter's hands trembled as he opened the package. "Mrs. Higginbottom, Don't you dare Mrs. Higginbottom me," she spat. "I spend good money here, and you can't even get a simple order right. No wonder your business is dying." Stanley's massive frame loomed behind his father, his jaw tightening with every word Carla hurled. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and rumbling, "you've made your point." Carla turned her venomous gaze on him. "And you? What are you, the muscle? Do you even know how to use those knives? Or are you just here to scare away customers?" Stanley's hands curled into fists at his sides, but Walter stepped between them. "Please, Mrs. Higginbottom, we'll make it right. Stanley, get her a fresh cut." The rest of the day passed in tense silence, but the encounter left a storm brewing in Stanley's mind. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the cracks in the ceiling, he replayed Carla's words over and over until they festered into something dark and unrelenting. Stanley knew where Carla lived. Everyone in Shepherdstown did. Her house, a garish 2-story Victorian painted an eye-watering shade of pink, sat on the edge of town. Around midnight, Stanley got out of bed, dressed in his work clothes, and grabbed his sharpest knife. The moon hung low and full, casting an eerie glow over the streets as he made his way to her house. Carla was alone. She'd spent the evening drinking wine and scrolling through her tablet, the television murmuring quietly in the background. When the first heavy knock rattled her front door, she jumped, spilling her drink. She froze, staring at the door. Another knock, louder this time. "Who is it?" she called, her voice trembling. No answer, just the sound of heavy breathing on the other side of the door, then a sharp metallic scrape, the sound of a blade dragging against wood. Carla's heart thundered in her chest as she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's bored voice answered. There's someone outside my door. He's trying to break in. You have to send someone. Ma'am, what's your address? Carla rattled it off, her voice shaking. The scraping sound stopped, replaced by a heavy thud. Then another and another. Stanley was chopping into the door, each swing of his butcher knife splintering the wood. Please hurry. He's going to get in, Carla screamed. The dispatcher sighed. Ma'am, is this Carla Higginbottom? Yes, it's me. Please, he's... The line went dead. Carla stared at the phone in disbelief. Hello. Another thud. The door cracked, a sliver of moonlight spilling into the darkened hallway. Carla dropped the phone and backed away, her breath coming in panicked gasps. The last thing she heard was the sound of the door giving way, and Stanley's low, rumbling voice. You've had this coming for a long time. In Shepherdstown, the night was quiet once more. Lincoln, Nebraska, was no stranger to biting winds and heavy snowfall, but for Aaron Miller, the winter chill wasn't the only thing gnawing at him. It began innocuously enough. A fleeting glimpse of an old woman standing at the edge of his yard late one night. Wrapped in a tattered gray coat, her silhouette was barely visible in the dim streetlight. Aaron dismissed it as a neighbor taking a walk or a passerby lost in the storm, but then she returned. The next night, Aaron was taking out the trash when he spotted her again. She was closer this time, standing motionless at the end of his driveway. The streetlight illuminated her face, sunken cheeks, wild gray hair, and eyes that glinted with something between madness and malice. Aaron froze, the icy wind cutting through his jacket as they locked eyes. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared. He hurried back inside, double-checking that all the doors were locked. Over the next few days, Aaron's unease grew. He began noticing signs of her presence, footprints in the snow leading up to his front porch, a faint knock on his door late at night. One evening, as he sat in his living room trying to lose himself in a movie, his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Hello? Aaron answered cautiously. At first there was silence. Then came the unmistakable sound of labored breathing, followed by a raspy voice whispering, "Why don't you come outside, Aaron?" His blood ran cold. "Who is this?" he demanded, but the line went dead. Aaron called the police, but by the time an officer arrived, the footprints outside his door had been erased by fresh snowfall. The officer listened patiently but seemed skeptical. "Probably just a prank," he said. "Let us know if anything else happens." Anything else did happen. Aaron began researching the woman, asking around the neighborhood. Her name was Agnes Ford, a reclusive widow who lived in a decrepit house at the edge of town. Years ago, her husband had died under mysterious circumstances. Whispers of foul play had circulated. Poison, they said, or perhaps a fatal shove during one of their infamous arguments. But no charges were ever filed, and Agnes had withdrawn further into her solitude, becoming a ghost of the community. One night, Aaron woke to the sound of scratching at his bedroom window. He sat up in bed, heart hammering, and saw her. Agnes was outside, her face pressed against the glass, her breath fogging up the pane. She grinned at him, revealing teeth that were yellowed and uneven. He grabbed his phone and called the police again, but by the time they arrived, she was gone, leaving only her footprints in the snow. The final straw came on a freezing Friday night. Aaron was taking a hot shower, hoping to wash away the tension that had been building all week. The bathroom was steamy, the mirror fogged over. As he rinsed the soap from his hair, the lights flickered. He frowned, peeking out from behind the shower curtain to look at the light switch. The flickering stopped, and he shook his head, blaming the storm outside for the power surge. He turned back to the shower, but a shadow caught his eye. It moved behind the curtain, a faint outline of a figure standing just on the other side, his breath caught in his throat. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The shadow didn't move. Heart pounding, Aaron reached out with a trembling hand and yanked the curtain aside. The bathroom was empty, but on the fogged-up mirror, a single word was written with a finger. Soon, Aaron stumbled out of the bathroom, wrapping himself in a towel as he grabbed his phone. He dialed 911, but before the operator could answer, his phone screen went dark. The power went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. Aaron never saw Agnes Ford again, but her presence lingered in every shadow, every creak of the floorboards. The police found no trace of her, only her abandoned house filled with dusty memories and a single photo of her late husband. For Aaron, the winter nights were never the same. He moved out of Lincoln the following spring, but the terror followed him, lurking in every flickering light and whispered breath. The antique shop sat at the corner of a narrow street, its windows cluttered with faded treasures and forgotten memories. Meredith hadn't planned on stopping, but her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was transfixed by something in the window. "Mommy, look!" Lily exclaimed, pointing at a porcelain doll perched on a dusty shelf. The doll wore a tattered blue dress with lace trim, its glass eyes glinting in the dim light. Long dark curls framed its pale face, and its lips were painted in a faint, unsettling smile. Meredith shivered. There was something about the doll she didn't like, something almost alive. "Honey, don't you think it looks a little creepy?" "No, it's beautiful. Please, can we get it?" Lily's eyes were wide with excitement, and Meredith couldn't say no. Against her better judgment, she bought the doll. At home, Lily was ecstatic, placing the doll on a small chair in her room. Meredith couldn't shake the feeling of unease as she watched the doll's unblinking eyes. That night, she lay in bed, her mind replaying the image of the doll's faint smile. It was just a toy, she told herself, nothing more. But the strangeness began almost immediately. The next morning, Meredith walked past Lily's room and felt a chill. The doll seemed to be looking right at her, its head slightly tilted, though she could have sworn it had been facing straight ahead the night before. She chalked it up to Lily moving it. Over the following days, Meredith's unease grew. She would catch the doll in different positions, its glassy eyes seeming to follow her around the room. Once, she thought its faint smile looked wider, its expression almost mocking. She tried to convince herself it was her imagination. One night, as she was preparing for bed, Meredith heard faint giggling coming from Lily's room. She froze, her heart pounding. Pushing open the door, she found Lily fast asleep, the doll sitting on the chair. Meredith's breath hitched. The doll's head was now turned toward the door. She couldn't remember it being like that earlier. "It's just a doll," she whispered to herself, closing the door. But the incidents escalated. Lights flickered whenever Meredith was near the doll. She began waking in the middle of the night to the sound of faint tapping, like tiny hands drumming against the walls. Once, she swore she saw the doll's eyes blink, but when she looked again, it was motionless. Finally, Meredith decided she'd had enough. While Lily was at school, she grabbed the doll, its porcelain skin cold and smooth under her fingers. She marched outside and threw it into the garbage bin, slamming the lid shut. That night, Meredith slept soundly for the first time in weeks, but her relief was short-lived. At around 3 a.m., she woke abruptly. Something was wrong. The room felt too quiet, the air too still. As she sat up, her eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she froze. The doll was at the foot of her bed. Its glass eyes glittered in the faint moonlight, and its smile was no longer faint. It had widened into a grotesque, sinister grin. The doll was covered with garbage. Meredith's breath caught in her throat as she stared, frozen in fear. She could feel its gaze boring into her, its presence suffocating. The doll's head tilted slightly, and though it didn't move, Meredith felt an unspoken threat emanating from it. She couldn't scream, couldn't move. The air grew colder as a faint giggle echoed in the room. The cabin was nestled deep in the Alaskan wilderness, miles from the nearest town, reachable only by a rugged dirt road that twisted through snow-laden pines. Emily had purchased it on a whim, thrilled by the unbeatable price at a tax-lien sale. A lifelong outdoors woman, she envisioned days spent hiking, snowshoeing, and savoring the solitude she'd long craved. After a grueling 12-hour drive, Emily finally arrived at the cabin, its rustic charm marred only by the eerie silence of its surroundings. Snow blanketed the ground, and the dense forest pressed close, as though the trees themselves were leaning in to watch her. She unpacked her truck quickly, eager to get inside and start settling in. As she lit the wood stove and began organizing her belongings, there came a knock at the door. Startled, Emily hesitated before opening it to reveal a man in his late 50s, clad in a thick parka and boots caked with snow. His weathered face broke into a polite, if strained, smile. "Name's Winslow," he said, extending a gloved hand. "I live about 100 yards that way." He pointed vaguely through the trees. "Saw your truck. Thought I'd come welcome you." Emily shook his hand, relieved to find a neighbor in such an isolated place. Winslow's voice was gruff but friendly, and she invited him inside for coffee. As they talked, he mentioned he'd lived in the area for over 2 decades. "Beautiful place, but it's not without its quirks," he said, his tone darkening. Emily raised an eyebrow. "What kind of quirks?" Winslow hesitated. "You'll have visitors at night. They'll knock on your door, ask to come in. They'll try to trick you, but you must never, ever let them inside. They can't come in unless you invite them." Emily forced a laugh, thinking he was pulling her leg, but Winslow's expression remained grave. "I'm serious," he said. "You don't want to know what happens if you let them in." The conversation left Emily unsettled, and she made an excuse to cut the evening short. Winslow didn't protest, only offering a quiet warning as he left. Be inside by sundown. A few nights later, Emily was sitting on her porch, wrapped in a blanket and smoking a joint under the starlit sky. The forest was peaceful, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. She exhaled a cloud of smoke, feeling relaxed for the first time since arriving. She had finished smoking her joint. She was enjoying a hot cup of cocoa, and suddenly felt as if someone or something was watching her. She looked around cautiously when she noticed something not very far away. Eyes, a pair of glowing orbs reflecting the moonlight from the edge of the woods. Her breath hitched. Another set of eyes appeared beside the first, then another, and another. Emily's pulse quickened as the eyes moved in unison, inching closer. She stood, retreating toward the door. The eyes followed, keeping perfect formation. Heart pounding, she slipped inside and locked the door, yanking the curtains shut. But curiosity got the better of her, and she peeked out through the shades. A dozen sets of eyes stared back at her, unblinking. The hours crept by, each one heavier than the last. Somehow she made it through the night. At first light, she marched to Winslow's cabin, anger and fear bubbling inside her. She told him everything, her voice shaking. "I told you to stay inside after dark," Winslow said, his tone calm but firm. "They'll always be watching now. Moving away won't help. Believe me, I've tried. They followed me across 3 states." Emily's heart sank. She trudged home, feeling the weight of his words. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, there came a knock at her door. Emily froze. "Who is it?" she called, her voice trembling. "It's Winslow," came the reply. "I need to talk to you." It wasn't fully dark yet, and she cautiously opened the door. Winslow stood on the porch, his face pale and drawn. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice unnaturally soft. Something about his tone made her hesitate. His smile began to widen, stretching far beyond the limits of a human mouth. His jaw unhinged with an audible crack, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Emily slammed the door and locked it, her hands shaking. She grabbed her phone and dialed Winslow's number. He answered on the second ring. "Thank God you didn't let it in," he said, relief evident in his voice. "That thing would have killed you for sure." Days passed with no further incidents, though the eyes in the woods never left. They watched her every night, glowing and unblinking. Then one evening, there came another knock. Emily didn't answer. She looked out the window and saw a little girl standing on the porch, her face pale and tear-streaked. Blood soaked her jeans, and she clutched her leg as though injured. "Please," the girl whimpered. "I'm hurt. Can I come in?" Emily's stomach twisted. She knew better. The girl looked up, meeting Emily's gaze through the window. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, and she began walking toward the glass, dragging her injured leg. "I just need help," the girl said, her voice cracking. Her mouth began to widen, her jaw stretching with a series of sickening pops. Her face contorted, the skin pulling taut as her eyes turned black. Emily shut the curtains, retreating into the safety of the house. But the next night there was another knock. This time, she was ready. She grabbed the rifle that had belonged to her father, loading it with trembling hands. The knock came again, louder this time. Emily pressed her eye to the peephole and saw a man standing there, his back to the door. "May I come in?" the man said, his voice low and gravelly. He turned slowly, his face unnaturally pale. Emily flung the door open and aimed the rifle at him, her heart pounding. "Leave now," she warned. The man's smile stretched wide, his mouth opening at an impossible angle. She pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the forest, and his head snapped to the side, barely hanging on by sinew and skin. Blood dripped onto the porch as his body remained standing. "May I come in?" the head wheezed, dangling grotesquely. Emily slammed the door, bolting it shut, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. Outside, she heard faint laughter as the wind howled through the trees. She knew this was far from over.